Good morning and welcome to Arise Africa. My name is Michael Mwikamba. We kick off this show with a segment I like to call the catch-up, where I give you a roundup of what you might have missed in the headlines. And starting us off, the UN Food and Agriculture Organization says that has less than 1 month in funding its needs to help ensure food security in parts of South Sudan. The agency wants to send emergency livelihood to kits to farmers and fishers and pastoralists as the risk to famine grow. The FAO has appealed for $108 million to be revised the crisis response plan, but so far it's received $42 million. Jeff Shally, who's in charge of the Emergency Rehabilitation District, said that the conflict is completing with the humanitarian crisis. The conflict has taken a severe toll on Sudan, and the areas hardest hit are between the government forces and rebels of Jangoy, Upper Nile in the Unity States. There are so many displaced people there, and the FAO Emergency Livelihood Kit will contain fish hooks and fundamentals of survival kits. Shally said that the FAO would be able to help more people if it received the full $108 million requested. The FAO also says that it's of its essence that rain could cause floods and further displacements, as well as a greater access for aid group. And their in time is just taken to grow crops and the seeds in emergency kits. Shally says that at least 6 weeks need to grow vegetables in a big way to eat. On the screen you can see the condition in southern Sudan as they go through the floods and the displacement, and Shally is saying that if they were given the full $108 US, they would do enough with it. They could be able to settle the displaced people. And moving on to other parts of Africa, hundreds of patients in Africa are suffering from the devastating effects of Ebola. Health experts are scrambling to determine which drug they might offer the best experimental treatments. The researchers were being pressed by the government official to speed up their work, where 3 threats and they're shown especially promising on monkeys. The researchers say that one produced in tiny California biotech lab of biopharmaceuticals gained international prominence in the week, and when it was given to the 2 US aid workers, it was contracted Ebola in West Africa and have shown signs of improvement in other from Vancouver-based Temamira Pharmaceuticals and privately held Proferus Biosciences in town of Tarrytown in New York. On Wednesday, the World Health Organization said that it would discuss the weak ethics of using Ebola drugs and never been cleared of human use. Worry along the history because medicines have been tested on people who've never properly informed the risk. In the countries hardest hit by Ebola, suspicions for foreign medical workers already widespread. But the Minister of Nigeria, Ole Buchuchukwu, told reporters this week that they have asked the US health officials about the excess experimental drugs in Ebola, therapies in the US drug makers have failed the questions of the government officials about the abilities to supply the treatment in significant quantities should request come. On the screen you can see the footage about Ebola and what is going on in West Africa right now, and it has caused a lot of devastation. It's showing, the map shows that where Ebola was before, it was Central Africa, Uganda, it went through East Africa, but now the seriously hit is West Africa. You can see doctors trying to contain it and try to treat the wounds. The images look pretty graphic, but then they're doing tests on other possible drugs that they will use. They're using monkeys as guinea pigs before they can test it on human beings. But things are looking up for the new investigation on Ebola. And moving on to West Africa, where health workers in West Africa appeal on Wednesday for an urgent help in controlling world's worst Ebola outbreak as the death toll climbs to 922. Liberia shut the major hospital where several staff has been infected, including a Spanish priest. The World Health Organization said that it would ask medical ethics experts to explore the emergency use of experimental drugs and to tackle the highly contagious disease after the trial drug was given to 2 U.S. charity workers infected in Liberia. With West Africa's rudimentary healthcare system swamped, 45 new deaths from Ebola were reported in the 3 days and on to 4th of August. The World Health Organization said that Liberia and Sierra Leone have deployed troops in the worst hit area in the remote border region and to try stem the spread of virus, which there are no known cures. And World Health Organization also experts began a 2-day crisis meeting in Geneva to discuss whether the epidemic constitutes of a public health emergency and international concern, and the two consider the steps of overstretching the emergency organizations and international alarms to the fusion of the virus increased for the U.S. Died in Nigeria last month. From Liberia, that is. Authorities have also said that Wednesday that the Nigerian nurse who treated Patrick Sowa also died of Ebola, and 5 people have been treated in the isolation ward in Lagos, that is the Africa's largest city. With doctors strike in Lagos, Health Commissioner Jide Idris said that volunteers were urgently needed to track 70 people who came to contact with SOA. Only 27 people have been traced. You can see that should be a photo of Nigeria's market and showing that the conditions going on in Ebola. You can see the health practitioners and everybody volunteering to try curb these Ebola attacks in Nigeria, having their masks on. And we move on to other parts of Africa and other news making headlines. A top UN official on Wednesday told the Security Council a fresh violence in South Sudan is dragging the youngest country closer to humanitarian catastrophe as the global body bolsters its military presence there. Edmond Mulet, the UN Assistant Secretary General for the peacekeeping operation, warned civil members that the militia violence in South Sudan has displaced more than 1 million people. Almost 500,000 have fled across borders, with widespread displacement being compounded by hunger and food problems. Almost 4 million people have a risk of going hungry amid the growing concerns of famine. Mulet said that up to 50,000 children are at risk of dying of acute malnutrition this year alone, and peace talks between South Sudan government and the foreign rebel fighters of Ethiopia were started on Monday with aims of creating a transitional government, but they are not yet have not yet yielded any breakthroughs following fresh clashes along South Southern Sudan border. Some believe that the violence is threatened to pull the Sudan rebels group into Sudan's civil war. A militia hunting the neo-ethnic group has been blamed for the death of at least 6 South Sudanese aid workers in the recent days. All of the murdered aid workers are members of the Neo, which the former president and the current rebel leader, Riek Machar, belongs to. You can see from my screen footage from Sudan with the tension and the emergency thing that I've set to make Sudan go into a humanitarian crisis. That is what it has been dubbed. With the things running on in Sudan, it's pretty interesting because Sudan is actually the youngest state in Africa, and with the rebel powers and everything that goes around it, it should go. It's tentatively seen that it can go on a humanitarian crisis, which is what we do not hope for them. And in other places, also in Sudan, Sudan's cabinet met an emergency session on Tuesday over flooding that killed 23 people and destroyed homes and sparkled complaints in the environment to the government of negligence. Other 6 people died in Garissa State, south of the capital of Suna, said earlier, citing the local government ministers. were electrocuted, and one died when his home collapsed. As Sudan's rainy season begins, there is already been brief, violent, and stormy storms around the capital region and beyond since the 25th of July, rather, after the latest ferocious downpour early Sunday. The reporters found 100 of families digging through the rubble and the collapsed homes in Salha district in Khartoum during in the city of Adunman. The complaints state of emergency shelter and help has been shown to arrive in Kadir, say that all families affected will receive tents and aids by Monday. Reform Now party has called the Kadir dismissal because of completely failed to have a solution of rainy crisis, which has repeated every year. Kadir said that Khartoum started its construction of the 2-year 2,200 kilometers concrete drainage system under the 7-year plan aimed at preventing flooding. Suna reported that the government brief in the first Vice President Bakri Hassan Mle on Monday. An interdiction last August was the worst strike in the capital quarter century that has affected 180,000 people, and says that is according to a report said by the United Nations. More rain is expected this week, and that is what is happening in Sudan. We're catching up with Sudan. And in other news that might have made, that have actually made big headlines this week, the UN states on Monday urged African leaders to respect the political differences, saying that it's a core democratic principle that the vital of achieving the long-term economic growth. The call came to start an unpredicament U.S. Africa Summit in Washington, attended by 35 presidents, 9 prime ministers, 3 vice presidents, and 2 foreign ministers, and a king. The 3-day program talks of one of Barack Obama's biggest initiatives for Africa against the backdrop of Ebola outbreak and several security crises in the continent. Washington is, however, seeking stronger economic ties with Africa, having found itself out of place in China and Europe at the continental, where the International Monetary Fund expects to see a 5.4% growth this year and a 5.8% next year. But in sharp contrast to China's business first approach, U.S. leader has addressed democracy and a civil right concern, where the U.S. Vice President Joe Biden met Africa's civil rights leaders and encouraged them to fight corruption. On the screen, you can see a photo of a picture of the summit, where the U.S. actually talking about a call for Africans to maintain peace, since it's what they need. It's exactly what they need to battle and to get to the economy they so desire. And Somalia's government begged to help on Tuesday, warning that the war-torn nation might be facing hunger and drought catastrophe in 3 years after the famine killed more than 250,000 of the people there. Drought has already reached several regions in Somalia. That's according to the government, and says that it's warning that it actually anticipates the situation to continue to deteriorate. The aid is in form of food, water, and medication must urgently reach the affected population. That's according to the statement by the government. And last month, the UN warned Somalia has been sliding back into acute hunger crisis, which part of the capital of Mogadishu, facing near famine level shortage of organization, are unable to meet the needs of 350,000 displaced people in the Somalias internationally. Backed by the government, Somalia is actually internationally backed by the government, as selected in 2012. A widely hailed offered by the best chances that dedicates the repair of war in the ravaged country. The UN assessment show above the emergency level of malnutrition in several towns, including the major centers of Garowe, Galkayo, and Kismayo, with the highest deterioration reports in Mogadishu, where more than 250,000 people, and half of them children, died in the devastating famine in 2007. Reports of hunger and crisis inside the capital cast further post over as the government was following accusation of corruption and determined to continue the attacks by the Islamic Sheba insurgencies, even with the most well-protected areas. You know that thousands of displaced in a war live in the basic makeshift shelters of Mogadishu were Al-Qaeda-linked Al-Shabaab fighters, Al-Qaeda-linked actually Al-Qaeda and linked Al-Shabaab to continue launch a regular attack including the braved commandos that have raided the presidential palace and the parliament. The hardline Shebab has also controlled the most of the southern Somalia and have driven out the most possible in Mogadishu and Somalia's major town, up to 22,000 strong AU forces. And in Kenya, a short brief as the maize lethal necrosis, that's a new disease, the maize lethal necrosis. The MLN has a relative new virus to crop disease in Kenya, which is spread by insects, and as a population, as the potential limit in Kenya's maize production as a stable food in the country. The MLN, which is the disease, has already reduced the year's maize production by 60% in parts of southeastern and central and eastern Kenya, according to a study carried out by the Food and Agricultural Organization of the UN in July. At least 16,000 acres of maize or cropping land have been already destroyed, and this is prompted by the government to organize the task force and scientific mid-September in order to set about the mitigation of effects and disease. The Region Food and Security Nutrition Workshop Group that was recommended to enforce the quarantine of the procedures as a short-term strategy to reduce the impact of the disease. That's all we had in the news today. We go on a short break, but when we come back with the business roundup. You're watching Arise Africa.